it's important to understand that a buyer is a person, and as such, that people are vastly more complex than computers. However, when we look at the psychology of the typical software buyer, remember, your buyers can differ, your mileage may vary a little bit, but there are four key characteristics that we need to look at. Fear, control, or maybe I should say the need for control, the fact that buyer distrust outweighs trust, and buyers have a great deal of comfortableness. Is that a word? They find great comfort in the status quo. So let's look at these four characteristics in detail. Earlier, I mentioned how fear is the greatest and largest hurdle that we as sellers must overcome. Buyers are afraid of many things. They're afraid of your software. They're afraid of your company. They're afraid of you. And they are afraid of the entire software buying process because, in truth, they do not understand it nearly as well as you or I do. Because this is something they don't do all that often. Multiple studies show that when all factors have been made constant, buyers are actually less likely to purchase when a live person is involved as compared to a computer. So let me give a little bit of detail on this. In the study that I'm referencing, or there's actually a couple studies, they were first done with small dollar amounts, not like the sales we get involved in. However, they had a live person make an offer to a buyer, and then they had a computer make the exact same offer to a different buyer. And they found that people were more likely to buy from a computer as compared to a live person, even when the deal is exactly the same. So this is very interesting when we talk about psychology, because you wonder why. And what they discovered is that buyers knew the person was trying to sell them. And it caused the buyer to rethink the purchase. I should mention that the purchase the buyer was being offered would be one they should make. It was one that would work to their benefit. And so they should have really 100% of buyers should have made this purchase in the study. However, less did from a live person than a computer because the buyers were evaluating the seller's trustworthiness. And we as sellers, if we fail the trustworthiness test, it will negatively affect our sales and we will not sell as much software. And I can tell you when it comes to fear, because of the large monetary end that the software is that we sell, because the dollars are so high, that fear is greater. Most likely executives are looking at this purchase, they're evaluating the people running it, and if our software doesn't meet their needs and it doesn't solve their problems, most likely they may lose their job. So fear is going to be the greatest hurdle that we as sellers have to overcome. And I'm going to give you some definitive strategies for doing that. Let's dive a little deeper into why buyers are afraid. First off, most buyers do not understand our software's market. They just don't. They may not have ever gone through, let's suppose you sell analytics software. Most likely, their interaction with you is the first time they've gone through the buying process for analytics software. And as a result, they don't understand the tricks of the trade. They don't even know what they should be looking at. I have to tell you, I have had an opportunity to be at the front end of these buying processes. And as a consultant, I get asked to get involved in them. And I have to tell you, it is a rare occasion when a buyer truly understands how to evaluate any software's market. And these buyers, they have heard horror stories of failed software purchases, and don't want to be one of them. One of the jokes that exists in the industry is, what is the most purchased piece of software? Is it database software? No. Is it word processing software? No. The most commonly purchased piece of software is shelfware. It is software that companies or agencies buy, and it just sits on a shelf collecting dust and nobody's using it. And our buyers, they don't want to purchase shelfware. And they're so afraid that that's what's going to happen. Next thing I want to bring up, a lot of these buyers are afraid that you and I, as sellers, only care about the sale and not about them as a person. That we're just there to get a sale, we're just there to make some money, and then we're going to go away. And for them, this is terrifying because they want someone who will go the extra mile for them. Because again, as I've mentioned several times, their job may be on the line for this purchase. If they know you will go the extra mile, if they see that in the purchasing process, we're much more likely to get the business. So understand, these are the underpinnings of why buyers are so afraid. So we're going to start getting into some strategies for overcoming fear, regardless of the type of software you sell. Let's look at an approach and strategy for overcoming the fear that's within our buyers. I like the little image I have here. We're going to transform that fear into action. Let's talk about how we overcome fear in a buyer. This is possibly the most important section of this course. So the key ways we overcome buyer fear is, number one, address their concerns, empower the buyer, share critical information, show compassion. We will never tell the buyer what to do. We will be transparent, and we will foster certainty. Let's look at each one of these tactics and approaches for overcoming fear. When we're addressing the concerns of the buyer, here are some key things to understand. When a buyer states a problem or a concern, make sure to first empathically listen. We need to make sure that we are listening to their concern. And when they voice it, do not counter it at first. First, repeat the concern or problem back to them. This way you ensure that you understand what exactly they are communicating. Once the buyer believes that you understand the issue, then you can discuss how your software or your company can address this concern. So here's the key thing. When an issue or concern comes up, you don't have to answer the question in that moment. If you don't have to have an answer to their question, whatever you do, do not make up an answer. It's absolutely fine to say that you have to go back to your developmental team or to an executive or to a VP to make sure that you give the buyer the very latest and best and accurate information. Don't be afraid of saying any of those things. Number one, those are classy responses. And it shows that you care, that you heard the issue and the concern. And the last thing you'd want to do is tell them something that isn't accurate. So the first thing we want to do is address their concerns, listen, repeat the concern back to make sure you have it. And whatever you do, we never respond defensively. So keep these in mind when we're addressing their concerns, because this is how we're going to overcome fear. The next technique we will talk about is empowering the buyer. Remember, buyers do not know as much as sellers about the software that they're purchasing. It is your job and my job as sellers to expand their knowledge, to teach them about the industry. You want to be an instructor as well as a salesperson. So as you are meeting with your buyers, teach them about your market. Teach them the gotchas and the tricks and the little things that happen. I'll give an example, maybe just off the top of my head. Let's suppose you're selling ETL software, extraction, transformation, and load. Most vendors will tell a buyer, hey, anything that we let me word this another way. Sellers of ETL software will say any process that we have in our stream, we capture metadata on. We do it for the entire ETL process that you have in our tool. Well, that's not quite true, though sellers say this all the time. Anytime in an ETL process that you call an external program, which you always do, they always include those, you don't capture metadata on those, other than we're making a call to an external program. When you teach, if you were an ETL salesperson, if you were to teach your buyers about that, you are now being an instructor as well as a salesperson. And this is really the essence of consultative selling. It is teaching your buyer, empowering them, growing them, and they are going to start looking at you as a trusted advisor. As part of being a great teacher and a consultative seller and overcoming fear, it's so important to share critical information. So don't be afraid to share important information and knowledge to the buyer. So I will give you an example of how difficult this can be. I have had to try to sell into a buyer on the day I discovered the company I was working for was sold. This is back when I worked at a software company. We were sold, and I had to go on a sales call. And the first thing I did was say that proactively to the buyer, to say, oh, by the way, this occurred today. This was very hard to do. I'm making it sound simple. It was not. It was so difficult. But here's a learning point. The buyer's going to find out anyway. In the days of the internet where we can go on and do web searches, there are no more secrets. So it is so much better to have it come out from the seller rather than the internet. I just had this with a group, a software company I was teaching data governance sales to. During our class, it was announced that they were purchased by another company. And it was the exact same advice I gave to that team. Go out and tell your buyers that you've been sold, because they're going to find out anyway. In fact, when they let me know what was happening, the learners in the class said, yeah, I have a whole bunch of buyers emailing me right now about this. That's how fast. Some of the guys and gals found out about it from their buyers first. That's how fast information moves. It's so much better to have had the information come from you, the seller, than the internet. Remember, any information you give to a buyer, number one, it must be relevant, and it must help them, especially with any problems or challenges they're trying to overcome. So we only want to share relevant information, and we want to make sure we do it proactively, especially if it's something like the examples I've given, because it's so important that that information comes from us.